for the posture first, and to just do as many of the features. In particular, right, like let your you just for a moment notice your vertebrae, and just let your back kind of naturally straighten. Imagine kind of the very crown, the very top of your head kind of pulling up just slightly. Shoulders kind of going back and down. Have a sense of having, just enough energy so that your body stays in that posture, but without making any extra effort. So that there's a sense of, on the one hand, kind of maintaining the posture, and at the same time, relaxation. Briefly we start, by just briefly remembering refuge. So with an awareness of our own and others' suffering and vulnerability to sorrow, pain, and suffering. The fear of that, we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Remember our motivation for meditation. That the motivation is compassion, wishing to free ourselves and others from suffering, lead ourselves and others to happiness. So loving compassion. And we'll start with just the breathing, meditation on the breath. So gently bring your attention to the breath. As you breathe in, be aware of the present moment sensations, breathing in. As you breathe out, be aware of the sensations, breathing out. Focus on the sensations of the air coming in and out of your nose. The sensations of the gentle movements, your ribs and our abdomen. Just gently bring your attention to the sensations of the breath. And whatever thoughts, feelings, ideas, and so forth arise, each time they arise, try to actually notice them as early as possible as they're arising, and without judging them, without following after them. You just gently bring your attention back to the breath. that was just a brief one on the breath. So, so today, I mean, next, what we'll do a little bit is to experiment a little bit with meditating on positive emotions, which we haven't done a lot of it yet in this particular series of classes. But I just wanted, before we actually try them out, I want to make a couple quick, like a brief preliminary comments about that. So what is this? It is once somebody, I guess somebody asked the Dalai, at the great monastic universities of Tibet, that are now they have in Tibet, but also in India, right? Because they're in exile. So the monks study for between 25 and 40 years at the monastery. And so somebody said to the Dalai Lama, well, what are they studying for? Like what do the monks have to study for 40 years? And the Dalai Lama said the main subject is compassion. So first of all, I'll just make a comment about that. Like, can you imagine that? Like in our culture, nobody ever studies compassion for the most part. Like, I've asked, I've asked medical doctors. Almost every medical doctor I ever asked said they never had it. And nobody ever mentioned it in their education. And I've asked therapists, because I sometimes teach therapists, and I've asked, and up until a few years ago, nobody had ever mentioned. Empathy is different, like empathic understanding to accurately, but compassion is different, right? It means actually wanting somebody to be happy, which is different than just understanding somebody's experience. And even therapists, until a few years ago, almost nobody had ever, every single therapist would say, no, nobody ever mentioned that in my entire education, it just didn't come up. And so from what's it called? Nursery school, I guess. There at least they say be nice. Don't hit. That's something. But nobody, so in our culture, I'm just pointing out that that's not a big topic, right? Nobody gets like a master's degree in compassion. There's never, there's not a single class in anywhere. Actually, it'd be hard to find a class, actually, any place, right, in compassion. So it's a cultural difference, right? Dalai Lama says the main subject that they study is compassion. It's not the only subject, but it's the main subject. And the reason why I'm saying that is that there's an incredible inner science of positive emotions in the Indo-Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And actually, if you study it deeply, it's unbelievable how many different, so they differentiate, actually. They say, well, what do you, actually, because I sometimes thought of it, in America, right, if you say I love somebody, that could mean a lot of different things, right? It could mean I want that person to make me happy. It could mean I want them to do stuff for me. It could mean I want to do stuff for them. It could mean I care about them. It could mean I'm really attached to them and would be upset if they left me. It has a lot of different potential meanings. And it's not so clear usually. Oftentimes when people say I love you to somebody else, then oftentimes, right, one person thinks they mean one thing and they actually mean something else. And that leads to a lot of confusion and problems. So I wanted to share this, that in, for example, I'll just share, actually it was interesting, recently I've been editing some of the teachings by Khenpo Rinpoche on love and compassion. And he makes it extremely clear, right, that there are all these different levels and the types of love, which are different than types of compassion. And so he makes it clear, so if somebody says, oh, I'm developing a sense of love, it's very clear that there are all different, it depends on the person, which kind of love they're developing, but we're supposed to know that. In other words, if you're really practicing Buddhism seriously, you have to know those different levels so you know which one you're cultivating. So I guess what I'm getting at there is this, so they have a huge inner science, first of all, of describing different states of mind, right, descriptively. What is this? What is this? What is this? What does it mean to have, so for example, love that's a kind of warmth and affection, right, is related to, but a slightly different state of mind from love that cherishes another and sees them as extremely precious. And then that leads into a kind of love that desperately wants, or deeply wants, deeply wants another to be happy. That's different from a love that not only wants others to be happy, but wants to help. There's one sense of how nice it would be if that person were happy. Right? There's one description of love that's like that, right? Oh, that'd be really nice. Wouldn't it be nice if Rebecca were happy? That's totally a different state of mind from I'm committed, I want to help. right? Those are two different states of mind, actually. They're similar, right? And one comes first, right? You have to have one to develop the other. But you see what I'm getting at? Like, these are all different, they're subtle distinctions, but they're actually different states of mind, right? And then there's like, kind of taking some level of commitment versus kind of being absolutely committed, right? They usually use the analogy there of like a parent, right? Like, it's one thing, like, for example, I noticed this when I was with my sister, that like, when I was with I would look at my nephew, and I would both want him to be happy and feel some sense of commitment. But my commitment wasn't as strong as my sister's, right, who's his mom. She was the one who got up in the middle of the night without a second's hesitation. I wasn't getting up. So there's a difference, right? So there are many different levels of loving commitment. And then love is different than compassion, actually. They say that love is focused on wanting someone to have happiness they don't have. That's the ultimate expression of love. But then compassion is wanting to free somebody from suffering. And I'll just share this, that actually, so compassion is actually a stronger, in Buddhist psychology, they say compassion is the most, actually the Tibetan word for compassion is Ning Je. Ning means heart, like one's heart. And Je, you can translate as exalted. So the meaning is that it's the most exalted state of our heart. And they say it's the strongest cause of happiness also. But it's also a stronger state of mind, because love, wanting somebody to be happy, is actually a very positive state of mind, but compassion is willing to face the actual suffering that others experience. So it's a braver, stronger state of mind, where you're actually not only wanting them to be happy, but you're willing to face whatever suffering they go through, and want to free them from it. And again, then there are many different levels of compassion, right? From, it'd be nice if they were free from that, to I wish they were free from that, to I will help them be free from that, to I commit to, and so on, all the way up to bodhicitta, which is said to be the highest expression of compassion, which is the wish to, based on universal altruism and responsibility, is committing to achieve enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. And also, I'll point out, that's another difference actually. Buddhists also differentiate between a sense of love for one person, right, like a parent has for their child, and then a sense of universal love, like love for, and how universal is one's love, right? There could be just love for, so Buddhism actually differentiates very strongly on that point, actually, because so for example, if somebody says, I have a lot of love for everybody who's my class, or my caste, or my race, or my whatever, economic status, which is what a lot of people have, right, or my Democratic or Republican or something, and so Buddhism says that's not a particular, that's better than hate, for sure, but actually that leads to hate, though. Whereas if you only love, people of your group, then eventually you're going to hate the people of some other group, right? So Buddhism says that's not particularly, actually what Buddhism says really is everybody has that, like even gangsters have that, so that's not very impressive. It's actually not very spiritually meaningful. So Buddhism emphasizes also in this sense that eventually developing a sense of love, compassion, and altruism that has a sense of equanimity, or embraces all beings. Because you see what I mean? If you look even, what's the word? When you look at the lives recently, even of dictators, right? Like terrible dictators. Well, they still love somebody. Usually they love their own child because they want their child to become the next dictator. So if you have to think for ourselves. So if I'm cultivating that kind of love, then I'm not really any different than them. Actually, we don't think that way, right? We usually think, oh, but I love so and so. But actually, there's this idea that if you're really cultivating love, then it should have a sense of equalness. And actually, I'm going a little astray here, but I'll just say it very briefly. There are many reasons for that, right? Well, one is everybody's equally worthy of love, right? Because in other words, if you're a sentient creature, there's no real difference there. Also, we're all going to die, so we're all the same in that way. Also, we all don't know when we're going to die, so we're the same in that way. Also, we all want to be happy and don't want to suffer equally. So actually, Buddhists, and actually this is good to mention, because what this gets into is that there are now, so once you differentiate those different levels and kinds of compassion and love, then there are many, many, many different methods for giving rise to them. Some of them are rational, like analysis, like saying, well, everybody's equal and wanting to be happy. I'm so foolish that I have this attitude all the time of, my happiness is important and somebody else's isn't, or my friend's happiness is important and my enemy's happiness isn't. So one way of working with emotions is through reason like that, where you realize that you have these kind of habits of emotion, but they're not based on anything except the habit, and they're not really based on anything rational. That's one way of working with it. And then there are other ways of working with emotions based on memory and imagery, so there are techniques in Buddhism, remembering the kindness that one received as a child, and then using that as a basis for developing the emotion of love or compassion. So I'm just pointing out, and again, there's no other culture in the world that has as much definition of different levels and kinds of love and compassion and altruism. There's also no other culture in the world that has as many methods for cultivating them. Because that's a technology we've developed and spent millennia, I guess you could say, both developing and passing along and creating a culture and a literature and a practice around. So that's just like a little, I just wanted to give that as an introduction, like a context to meditation on positive emotions. And then I want to say something else about it. So for us, to start with, this thing of, universal altruism and so on is good intellectually, but it's a little intellectual, right? We have to start with how do you actually develop it. But I want to say something about that too, is that for some reason, I don't know, well, I know why actually, but historically, so in the West, the first thing that's become very popular is what we just did, right? Breathing meditation. And that's very popular because for a few reasons. One is just historically, Zen and Theravadan teachers came to the West first. That's the kind of meditation they emphasize, although they do other kinds. And so historically there were some reasons why. And then also I was talking about this last time, that we in American culture in particular, right, we grow up with a lot of intellectual, like studying math and memorizing history and things early on. And then we have all this input from technology, and so our minds are racing a lot. And so when we meditate on the breath, it calms us down and it's pleasurable. And so also there's a natural enjoyment of that. But actually, meditation on positive emotions is more important than meditation on the breath. So the key with meditation on positive emotions, I just want to say this, is doing it a lot. There's this time. Sometimes people many people have said to me that we'll try meditation on positive emotions, and they'll say, well, I didn't feel it that strongly. Well, you don't feel it that strongly because you're not used to it, right? I'm going to give a Western perspective here for a moment also, is that, what feels strong to you is whatever your brain is used to doing, actually, right? Whereas somebody who habituates their brain to anger has a lot of neuronal connections in the part of the brain associated with anger, and they're really good at giving rise to anger. They can do it really fast and really well. And they don't have to think a lot to do it, right? It's just somebody cuts them off and boom, they can have like an entire rage attack, and they're really expert at that. And if you're not as good at that, as if it's easier for you to give rise to fear or anxiety or anger than it is to give rise to love, and if you don't often have love attacks, or rages of love, then that's just because your brain doesn't have as much, I'm giving a Western perspective for a moment, but that's because your brain doesn't have as many neuronal connections because you don't spend as much time on that. Does that make sense? And actually think about it. How much time do you spend worrying about something? So you're building up, they would say it doesn't really qualify as meditation, because actually the definition of meditation in Buddhism is something positive. It has to be familiarizing the mind with something positive. So anxiety doesn't count as a meditation, but it's almost like a meditation, right? Whereas you're familiarizing your mind over and over. And people who are good at, whether you pick rage or anxiety, right? Either one, people who are good at those really get in the habit, right? Like, I'm driving and I'm thinking about it. I'm laying in bed and I'm thinking about it. At 4 in the morning I wake up and I'm thinking about it. And then when I go to sleep I'm thinking about it. When I wake up, when I'm at work, while I'm working, it's in the back of my mind, right? And that's how people get really good at, and somebody who's angry, it's the same thing, right? Somebody who's worried, it's always in the back of their mind. This could go wrong, that could go wrong. But also somebody who's angry, whatever they're doing, right? They're so good at this, they're so expert that they can meditate, I'm using that facetiously, while they're doing anything, right? So you could be doing other things and you're thinking, what a jerk, they're so selfish. How could they be that selfish? And how could they be so inconsiderate? And and your mind is and you have so many reasons also, right? Whereas both you have the visceral experience that's very powerful, right? But also your mind is expert at thinking of reasons, and then you start to go, not only do they do this wrong, but they do that wrong, they do other things wrong. They don't just do it to me, they do it to everybody, and also they don't even look good, and they, whatever. And then your mind starts to it elaborates, right? And then imagine, like, so you're developing a lot of familiarity with that state of mind, right? And I'm just pointing this out. So if you get familiar with any state of mind, right, then it's easier, it arises more quickly, with less effort, right, more intensely, and for longer. Does that make sense? And that's something actually that Buddhist psychology and Western psychology completely agree upon. That's a point they totally agree on. Buddhists call that imprints, and Western neurologists call that neuronal connections, but it's the same, just different words for the same experience. That's why the Dalai Lama and neuroscientists get along really well, is that they have to easily understand each other. But so, how much of the time, like imagine, well first of all, so how much of the time do you drive around or walk around doing that same kind of contemplation about love, right? And imagine what that would be like if all day you were like, so when somebody cut you off, your natural habit was, oh, they're so precious, they're so wonderful. And I'm not sarcastically either. That doesn't count. That wouldn't count, right? But, and walking around thinking about how others are so, how others deeply want to be happy, how they're so kind, how they're so, what's the word? How it's so unbearable that they suffer, and how, how unique they are, how important they are, how much they want happiness, and how kind they are to you, actually, right? And how important they are to you, and how everything, all your own happiness depends on them, and on your attitude towards them, and how love is all that actually matters anyway, and love is all that's valuable to cultivate. And so, like, imagine if you were going around for 7 or 8 hours a day cultivating that, what your mind would be like, right? Then actually you would have rages of love, and instead of panic attacks, you would have compassion attacks or something, where you'd be overwhelmed with compassion. In that case, you would be fine. You wouldn't. It's not that you would have a hard time breathing, but maybe you would breathe differently. You would breathe in the suffering of others and breathe out love. So that's the goal in a way. But so what it takes is repetition. And so if we start meditating on positive emotions. And actually, I'll just be honest, so if we start meditating on positive emotions and you have a feeling, oh, it's a little hard to feel that much, well, that's just a sign that you haven't done it, that you don't have many imprints yet, that you're not doing that enough, right? Which means do it more. And repetition, I'll say it for sure, this is true, that with emotion meditations, it's repetition that makes them powerful. Does that make sense? So if you do it over and over, then it'll be easy. And I want to say one more thing, because sometimes people get confused. So, these are also in a way, we sometimes call them contemplative meditations or something like that. And sometimes if you read like Buddhist books, like these Mahayana, like Lam Rim books and things like that, the Stages of the Path books, you'll see there are these like long descriptions of reasons. Like they're like this and they're like that, and there are 9 reasons for this and 16 reasons for that. And sometimes people think, oh, that seems too intellectualized. But I want to say a couple things about that, because this is really important for what we're going to do. Is first of all, like, those are for beginners who aren't good at it. Right, like in other words, the same way, like if you're not good at anger, right? Like let's say, actually, people do this all the time. I'll just give an example, right? Let's say I'm not angry at all at somebody, right? Like I kind of like them, and then you want me to be angry at them, right? Well, you're gonna have to present a lot of reasons, right? You're gonna have to say, no, you don't understand. Look, they did this and they did that. They did this other thing, and you think they're nice, but even when they were being nice, they were being phony. They weren't really trying to be nice to you. They were trying to manipulate you, and you would have to like give a lot of reasons. And if you kept going, eventually I would start to go, wow, maybe you're right, maybe they are a jerk. And then if you kept doing it, right, and then your facial expression was like, they did that, they did this, oh, and if you kept going, then eventually I would say, oh, they really are bad, right? So the reasons in the Stages of the Path book are like that. In other words, it's that the lamas look at us and go, well, these people aren't good at giving rise to love. I better give them a lot of reasons, because otherwise they're not going to succeed at it. But if you get good at those meditations, then there will come a point, and Pabongka Rinpoche and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, all the lamas say this, that at the beginning you have to go through all the reasons because you're just not good at it yet, right? So you need a lot of ways to give rise to a feeling. But once you get good at it, you don't need all that. In other words, like, when you get good at it, you could just like think, others are precious, or you could think love, just the word love, and it would give rise to the experience, right? Or you would just think of the person's face and it would give rise to the experience. Then you don't need all those words anymore. Does that make sense? So the words and the concepts and the, like so with Precious Human Rebirth, the 18, things that you contemplate and then the subsequent ones, like that's because that's for somebody who doesn't feel that their life is that precious, right? Which which is most of us, right? So they present 18 different reasons and other reasons, so because you're not good at that. Once you naturally feel that your life is incredibly precious, you don't have to think of all 18. You just give rise to the feeling and dwell on that. Or, you know, the same thing with love, right? If you could just think the word love and an overwhelming experience arises, well, then you don't need all the intellectual or all the words so much. You just dwell in that experience. Does that make sense? So sometimes people make the mistake of thinking they have to think all those words. You know, and it goes the same, like for emptiness meditation. Sometimes people think, oh, I have to do like the, you know, run through all 6 reasons in order to, you know, if you give rise to an actual experience of emptiness, stop thinking, dwell, you know, like, then you stop and you dwell on that. So whether it's love, whether it's compassion, whether any of those meditations, the words are to give rise to an experience. Once you have the experience, stop intellectualizing and dwell on the experience. Okay. So what I'd like to do is just go through a few experiential contemplative meditations to experiment with positive emotions. Okay, so let's you know, get back and you know, just like get back and kind of, you know, straighten your back and get comfortable. You know, relax your shoulders, have your back straight, and have a sense almost like that the top of your head is being, you know, just pulled up slightly, so it gives a sense of erectness to your posture. And the first thing, again, we're just like we're going to experiment with maybe three different exercises now. So for the first one, I just want to ask you first to bring to mind someone who in your lifetime really loved or adored or cherished you. So it could be a grandparent, could be a parent, could be an aunt or an uncle, or it could be a friend. But somebody who, from their heart, loved you, cherished you, cared in their heart about you. And bring to mind that person's face, you know, think of that person, what they were like, or what they are like, who they are. And just start to think about some examples of, on the one hand, like just their facial expression, when they would see you, when they would, you know, the facial expression that expressed how they felt about you, or their demeanor when they were around you. And then also, you know, just bring to mind examples, memories, or if you don't remember the details, you can imagine, you know, some of the details, but you know, they're in line with your history. But the things that they also did, things they did that expressed that feeling inside them of caring about you, or wanting you to be happy, of wanting you to be safe. So we're just going to spend a few minutes kind of thinking about and remembering. Even to remember the sense of happiness that they got. Actually, that they felt happy just to be around you. They felt happy to do things for you. When they were in that state of feeling love for you, it brought them joy, actually, to do something for you. It brought them joy just to see you. And within whatever level of wisdom or understanding they had, that they were happy to do whatever they understood was best. It's possible, right, that they were even happy to undergo some kind of suffering for your sake. Whether it was a suffering of, standing in a hot kitchen, a suffering of getting up early or staying up late, spending, resources that they worked hard to get. Whatever it was, that they were happy to do those things because of that feeling of connection with you, of affection for you, warmth towards you. And think about how they saw you as precious. They saw you as important to them. That of all the living and non-living things on this earth, that you were particularly important to them. Like notice how you feel in your body as you think about, what they did, how they felt, facial expression, their behaviors, even like any hardships they went through for you. Then notice how you feel in your own body. Notice where you feel feelings in your body and what those feelings are like. Think of them, check up if you feel anything in your chest, or if you have any sense of a feeling of something or if there are any feelings in your face or head or in your belly. Sure to notice what you feel when you think of just their sense of cherishing you. And what you feel if you think of times when they underwent difficulties or hardships or sacrifice for you. Also what you feel when you think about that they felt happy to be around you or to help you, that brought them joy. Notice how you feel about it. focus a little more, still thinking of their kindness and love for you. Just focus a little more on your own internal experience of what does it feel like in your mind, in your body, to be one who is cherished. That you, as a person, are one who is and has been cherished. Who is or has been seen as precious. Just focus for a few moments as you're just continuing to think about that person, just of what that internal experience is like for you, of being treasured. Of being valued. And then next, we're going to try, just experiment with, still focusing on that same person. And for this exercise, it doesn't matter, right? And whether they're, actually it doesn't matter whether they're alive or not, or if they've passed away, it doesn't matter. But just develop, now we're going to change the direction of our contemplation. And just for a few moments, we're going to cultivate, or experiment with cultivating, a sense of cherishing that person. So a feeling from your heart, a sense of warmth for that person, a sense of affection, of recognizing, right, both because of that person's kindness for me, and also just because of their basic existence, their humanity. I see them as valuable. I see them as precious. I see them as worthy of being cherished or treasured. And so developing a sense, or cultivating a sense of warmth, of connectedness, of like attraction or connection towards them. So by thinking in those ways, you can imagine that feeling coming from your chest towards them, or you can imagine looking at them with eyes and with a face of cherishing and love and warmth or affection. As you do that, you can also experiment with thinking thoughts like, may they safe. May they be content. May they be well. May they have what they need. Simply, may they be happy. So now I suggest that we also include ourselves in those thoughts. So may they and may I also. So we're cultivating a sense of loving affection or loving warmth towards ourselves and that other person. So may they and may I also be happy. May we be safe. May we be well. May we have what we need. May we be content and at peace. So as you continue to think those kinds of thoughts, you can have like the mental image of a kind of light or warmth radiating from your heart, kind of embracing or surrounding you and also that other person. That the nature of that warmth, the nature of that light, is the feeling of loving kindness that's associated with those thoughts. May we be well. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we have what we need. May we be content. May we be at peace. So continue with that, and only to the extent that you feel comfortable and ready. If you want, then you can include other loved ones. So with that visualization of the warmth and the light that embraces and reaches out, that's in the nature of loving kindness. And with those thoughts of may we be happy, may we be content, may we be safe. Sense of contentment and peace. So you can include other people, other loved ones from your family, other like dear friends, cherished friends. You can imagine them kind of all around you, bringing them to mind. To the extent that you're ready and want to, you can include them in that same visualization and the same thoughts. without judgment, but just notice what it's like. Notice if it's easy with some people. Notice if with some people it's harder, even among those who you cherish, or who are your loved ones. And that's okay. This is the process. We're just noticing our own experience. So as you think of some people, may they be happy, may they be safe, may they be peaceful. And with some, is it easier for that feeling to kind of flow out from you? With others, is it a little harder? And just to notice that without judgment, and just to keep contemplating. So we're including ourselves also, right? May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be well. May I have a sense of tranquility and joy. And also, may my loved ones be happy. May they be well. May they be safe. May they have a sense of peace, tranquility, joyfulness. And again, only to the extent that you're comfortable and ready. You can also include acquaintances, co-workers, people you see at the store, people you see on the street, in your house or party. And just experiment with those same visualization, right? Or the feeling of warmth and light coming out to them. With thoughts, right? May they also be happy. May they be safe. May they be joyful. May they be tranquil. May they be peaceful. May they be content. And just notice your own experience. Is it difficult? Is it easy? Are there certain obstacles, certain blocks that come up? Do you feel a lot, or do you feel nothing? Without judging, because again, you're just noticing your own experience. And then as you notice that, continue on with the exercise, including whoever you want to include. And for those who want to, you can also include even kind of strangers, people you don't know at all. All the people in Virginia, DC, Maryland, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. So, to the extent that you want to already, you can stay with just loved ones if you want, or you can expand it outward, right? Including yourself, loved ones, acquaintances, strangers. If you want to, it's up to you. You can even include either your personal enemies, the people you feel aversion usually towards, or groups that you tend not to like, whether for political reasons or groups from other countries, groups that are, if they're not your personal enemy, that are the enemy of your family, or the enemy of your country, or the enemy of your group in some way. If you want to experiment with them, then again, notice what it feels like if you try to expand those thoughts and feelings to them. And that you're still including yourself also. May I be safe, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering. May my loved ones be happy, safe, joyful, content. May strangers also be happy. May those precious ones who right now happen to be labeled strangers by me, who also totally want happiness and don't want suffering, just like me, may they also be happy, joyful, content, peaceful. And if you feel up to it, even those enemies, may they be happy, may they be safe, may they be joyful, may they be tranquil, may they be peaceful, may they be content, may they have what they need, and be joyful in their hearts. Final step, and again, only if you can just stay with the simple one of yourself and loved ones if you want. But for those who want to, the final step would be even to include everyone. So like all creatures on this planet, or even if you want, you can imagine like the entire universe. May any being anywhere be happy, be content, be joyful, be peaceful, have what they need. May all beings be happy. And when you're ready, come back to a more interactive mode. I guess I just want to ask, well, in general, how easy or hard did people find it? These different, both the kind of receiving kindness and then the cultivating loving kindness towards others. Like the actual process, how easy or hard did people find it? As compared to, say, breathing meditation or other techniques we've used.
Well, we largely focused on the fact that it was difficult to even generate an idea of someone who loved us unconditionally. So to think of that kind of love was difficult to even generate from the beginning.
Do other people have that experience too? And I guess, so let's talk about that a little bit, because it's a good subject, right? Like, yeah, okay, good. So I want to share something about that. Like, so, because this again, like, to me it's very interesting, I guess, this whole subject, partly because this whole idea, right, is so foreign to our culture to a large extent. It's not something that we focus on, and unfortunately, I think, like, to some extent, I really, actually, I think it's fair to say that also in the last 100 years of our culture, I think a misunderstanding in part of some misunderstandings of what Freud and later, and then people after him meant, led to a strange cultural phenomenon also about parents, for example, in particular, where it became kind of like in this, I don't think this happened at the very beginning, but I think from the 50s on, psychologically, like, there became also like an intellectual idea that it was like intellectually hip or something, or smart, that smart people could understand how messed up their parents were, right? And then this, and then some of the, and then it combined, I think, Western psychology combined with maybe some, political movements, and led to a kind of stance like that culturally. But anyway, so I want to say this, like, first of all, from a Buddhist perspective, like the Buddhist, if you look at the actual Buddhist teachers, right, and their stance and their teachings on this, they would say, of course nobody loved you unconditionally, because everybody's like you're in samsara, and so the beings who you come across are incapable of unconditional love. They're themselves trapped in horrible ignorance, utterly confused, and suffering terribly themselves. And so, like, and like, what's the way to say this? And only bodhisattvas love unconditionally, actually, right? Like, they would say bodhisattva, like, in other words, bodhisattvas and Buddhas do love unconditionally. Even arhats, actually, to some extent, actually, you could say arhats even love unconditionally. They're not the same as the bodhisattva, but they would say that, like, so basically, you could say it this way, that saints love unconditionally, right? But that ordinary beings may try to love unconditionally, but they're not capable of it. And so like the Buddhist teachers would say, and actually some of the teachings, if you actually study them, the teachings on these kinds of meditations, we didn't go into this much detail, but they actually talk about this. They say, if you think about the kindness that others have shown you, right, when you think about that it's like, to use a metaphor for a moment, it's like beings in a prison or a concentration camp who help each other a little, right? That's like a metaphor they actually use, where they say, these aren't like Buddhas or something like that, who are radiating light rays, and these are beings who are like totally miserable. Like, they give an analogy, sometimes when they teach on the kindness of a mother, actually that's a common meditation, and they're not saying mothers are perfect, like, they're saying, like, this is somebody who, like, grew up themselves, like the actual Buddhist meditation, right? Somebody who grew up themselves, at that time, maybe was what, 17, something like that, and had a kid, right? And doesn't know hardly anything about even how to live, right? And then is like getting up in the middle of the night and doing all this stuff and trying their best, and like, and then even they talk about this, actually, they say, and it's actually mothers and fathers actually create bad karma while trying to care for their kid, right? Like, they're like, because they don't even know, right? So they're trying to teach the kid right from wrong, but they teach the wrong thing sometimes, because they don't even know the right thing for themselves, right? And they're subject to so much suffering, and are suffering terribly themselves and creating the causes for more suffering, while they're trying so hard to help somebody else within the confines of the limited wisdom that a young person has, and then they die, right? Like, and so that's kind of, and there's a whole, like, so, like, I mean, I'm just using metaphors there, but that's almost a metaphor they would say. It's like, so if, like, and they often say that, for example, if you imagine, like, somebody in a concentration camp, who everybody's starving, and somebody gives the other, and somebody gets a few nuts and gives somebody half their peanuts or something, like, in one way that's unbelievably kind, right? Another way, well, it's only a few peanuts that make the person a little less hungry for a few minutes or something, or for one day maybe, but in the context, in other words, it's contextual, right? Like, it's not a billionaire who gives somebody a few peanuts. That doesn't really mean much, right? It's that the person is, like, trapped themselves, right? And there are these metaphors like Lama Tsongkhapa uses, right, where he says, Lama Tsongkhapa says that beings, like ordinary people, he gives these metaphors. He says when he looks at them and contemplates their existential status, he says it's like somebody caught in a riptide, and just if you're caught in a riptide, you'll most likely die, right? And then he says, but not only are they caught in a riptide, but if they're caught in a riptide on a pitch black night with no sun, right? And then somebody tied their hands, and the analogy he's giving is like, he's saying the riptide is like karma, right? That beings have these conditions of their life that are sweeping them away. And he says that's true, right? In other words, we all have that. We have these circumstances of our life that are difficult. He says not only that, the blind means people don't even have the wisdom to see. Like in other words, so not only are they caught in the riptide, but they're blind in the sense they don't have wisdom, right? And then he says their hands are tied, right? Partly because they don't have any ability, right? Like in other words, they can't, like beings don't have the ability to free themselves. Does that make sense? And so Eddie goes on with other metaphors, but he's saying like that's the existential status of beings. And I guess the metaphor there would be this, and so somebody under those circumstances who can practice some kindness to others, who help me, or somebody's drowning and they help me a little, wow. So that's the kind of way that, I'm just saying from a Buddhist perspective, that's the way it's contemplated in a sense. And I think oftentimes we may accidentally or without thinking that, if we're not trained that way, then we may sort of think, well, why weren't they more perfect? Right? Like why weren't they more unconditional? And why did they understand me better? And why were, and again, not that that's totally invalid, and there's a point to that. People do make serious mistakes. I'm not negating that, but I'm just saying from the Buddhist perspective, when you contemplate it, it's more like that. In other words, it's this idea that, and I guess I'll say it this way, that I'll say one more thing like that. This is actually in line with the Buddhist teaching, that there's a saying that, in other words, like, that the perspective of, on the one hand, who wouldn't wish that all parents, it's very reasonable to wish that not just parents, but everybody were wise, and like not just parents, our leaders, right? It would be nice if we had really wise political leaders and wise religious leaders and wise business leaders, right? Like heads of corporations, CEOs, but if you look around, right, the reality is that, whether you're looking at parents or, I saw a picture, it was a little while ago, I saw a picture of like Congress, right? And the picture was somebody was in the front of the Congress making a speech, and every other person, it was from behind, and all the other Congress members were playing solitaire and looking at like internet pornography, or I don't know, they were like, they were just like totally ridiculous, there was no, if you look at the, I'm not putting them, I don't even know what party they were, it doesn't matter, right? The point is like, these are just really, ordinary people who don't have much wisdom, like, it's not that they're like, they're not setting out to do that. That's the best they can do because they're like Lama Tsongkhapa said, right? Whereas they're caught up in their own afflictive emotions, they're caught up in their own petty things, they don't have much wisdom, and that's not just true. I'm not just putting down politicians, heads of corporations, parents, and everybody is in that status, so Buddhism says we're all in that status, we're all the same in that way, and Buddhism says that's actually a basis for developing compassion. Actually, like, in other words, if you recognize that, Kensei Rinpoche said, he said, like, everybody's like a beggar. Like, if you look at, in other words, and whether they're rich or whether they're poor, they're like a beggar, in the sense that, and then everybody's going to die, and everybody can die tomorrow, actually, and so if you start with that premise, and everybody's completely don't know what they're doing, actually, right? Actually, so this relates, so I'll keep going. So the Buddhist view is like that, and that then you personally, because actually this is the other side, that you have a precious human rebirth, right? And what does that mean? Actually, what that means in Buddhism is that, if everybody is like crazed and drowning and doesn't know what they're doing or something like that, and that you somehow, among all the creatures on this planet, first of all, like, they go through these whole thing, right? First of all, you have a nervous system that works okay, so you can actually understand things. And you have a brain that works properly, which not everybody has. And you're human, right? So you have a brain, a human brain, not a chipmunk brain. Which a chipmunk brain can't do that much, right? It can't contemplate its own status. And then you've come across, right, like teachings for cultivating altruism, right? which and teachings for cultivating, like for changing your own, cultivating positive emotions like love and compassion, and for cultivating a sense of wisdom that understands right from wrong on a deeper level, and for disciplining your own mind, right? Which almost nobody has, right? And like if I think back, like always here, like if I think of this contemplation, I think back to the like people who, it's my grandparents and my parents. Like none of them had opportunity, right? Like, none of them had the chance. Not that they had brains that worked okay, but none of them had the chance. Like they were too busy. There wasn't the opportunity. They didn't come across things like that. They were just having to survive and earn a living in order to pay the bills so that like their kids wouldn't starve, or something like. And they didn't have time to like. They didn't have the leisure. They didn't have the opportunity. They didn't have the free time. They didn't have somebody to explain it to them. So they had nobody to explain all of that, right? Like, or they had maybe somebody who said, some of them didn't even have somebody to tell them don't steal. Some did, but like think of it, right? Like, what level of moral teaching did they get before they, my grandfather was in 7th grade. He had to go to work, right? Like, later he educated himself some, but I'm just saying like that's the human condition. He's not unusual. That's most human beings. That's their status, right? And it doesn't matter, like I said earlier, from a Buddhist point of view, actually somebody could have a master's in business administration from Harvard, let's say, but from a Buddhist point of view, you would say they're the same as him. Because they didn't learn anything about how to cultivate their own, cultivate something like universal altruism. So what if they have, from a Western point of view, you'd say, oh, that person went to Harvard Business School, they can make a lot of money, or I don't know, something like that. But from a Buddhist point of view, there's no difference at all. Like a Buddhist, like the Buddha would say, so this person had to go to work at 7th grade, and this person, was 27 and had a master's degree from some place. But if they didn't learn something about about understanding what are the deep causes in human nature of happiness and unhappiness, then there's no real difference there. There's no wisdom about life. Does that make sense? So the Buddhist view is not the same as the Western. The Western view would be, well, oh, you can make more money, that's really important. The Buddha would say, so what if you made more money? Like then you died, and so that doesn't have any real meaning. They don't have anything else to, like they don't have any more than the person who didn't have an education to impart to their children unless they get some kind of inner education. That's what, they're just differentiating inner from outer education in a way. Not to put down outer education, but I'm just saying in terms of wisdom. So I guess the Buddhist view then would be that that you're utterly unique, actually. Like that there's, the Buddhist view is that, almost no one is like you, right? That you actually have this opportunity because you've met with these conditions and you have the kind of, you have the ability and you have access and you have leisure to do that, which almost nobody on this whole planet has, right? And so Buddhism would say actually that like, that, I guess the Buddhist view is that you're like, what should I say, that others are like trapped, like I was giving that earlier analogy, right? Trapped in a riptide in the middle of the night with their hands tied and a lead weight actually tied to their foot too. That's the other part. That's the other one. That's dragging them down to the lower realms or something. And that you're Bill Gates. Like you're what our society usually thinks of. You're, I don't know, is there somebody more fortunate than him now? I don't know who's the most fortunate person. And I don't know. He's the richest, I guess, right? Our culture values money, so that's why it's. So in our culture, you have to say, oh, who's the richest person? That you're the actual Bill Gates. Bill Gates isn't Bill Gates. You're Bill Gates. Like I'm using it as a metaphor. So they would say it like that. So they're saying, it's like from the Buddhist perspective. Then when you start to cultivate kindness, it's in that context. You see what I mean? It's like, wow, that this person did their best towards me. And of course it wasn't, and you would think, well, of course it wasn't unconditional. Like, they were some childish person who had these horrible circumstances and was miserable and, was like doing all these other things that were destructive and, and maybe did bad, and well, they did. I mean, Buddhism says that. Actually, they say one of the kindnesses, one of the ways you cultivate a heartbreaking compassion is you think about the bad things that people did, the things that they did that caused them suffering. Not just suffering, like, there's one kind of suffering that, like a parent, let's say parents and grandparents have, they woke up in the middle of the night and they changed your diaper and it was gross. They did it anyway, things like that. That's one kind of kindness that's extreme, actually, because nobody really, if you think of it, like, who would want to do that, right? But they did, then there's another kind of kindness that they actually, because they didn't know better, they actually created the causes for their own future suffering, right? Maybe they stole, maybe they lied, right? Maybe they did other, like, morally bad things because that was the best they could do to help you. Right? And then you think, wow, and they didn't know any better, right? So not only was their love unconditional, they may have, like, harmed somebody else, like cheated somebody to have more to give to me. Right? Like, so they cheated some other person to give me a little bit more. And then you think, oh gosh, like, this is horrible. Like, you know, in other words, it's part of cultivating a sense of compassion and love for them, and it's also part of a sense of renunciation for them. I mean, this is what samsara is, right? Is that, like, you know, it's like animals, right? That they go they kill one thing to feed it to their kid, but then the other one, you know, like, so they like the tiger kills an antelope to feed to their kid, and then the antelope doesn't have anybody to come home, and it starves to death, right? Like, that's the nature of samsaric existence, and it doesn't, you know, and like, you know, so that, I mean, that tigress didn't have unconditional anything. And our parents are a little similar, or in our political leaders and our CEOs and our bosses, right? The same thing, sometimes we project onto bosses this, like, childlike view that they should have some wisdom, actually, right? And we don't recognize they're just the same as every other drowning insect. You know, like, you know, as they don't know anything, actually. You know, like, they're just lost and in the dark and wandering, and then they're going to die. You know, and they don't even know. They don't think about that even. Not all bosses. I'm saying that's the normal status, right? Just like these senators, and just like. And so that's the Buddhist perspective, is like that we're all in that existential condition. And actually, if you think deeply about it, if you meditate on that, and then you meditate that in those circumstances still, like, beings try their best to not hurt me, and they try their best to be nice to me, and they, like, you know, give me a job at least, or they, you know, give me something, like that, it actually develops a sense of, like, empathy and of appreciation, I guess, in a way, that beings try their best, that we all try our best under those conditions. Does that make sense? Like, and that's the way so that's the context in which Buddhists contemplate this. So the Buddhist perspective is you kind of almost have to start with that existential view, right, of where beings are at, and that then they're trying to do whatever they're trying to do. And it applies to everybody, actually. In other words, like, you know, whether it doesn't matter whether it's a grandparent or a boss or you know, like, you see what I'm getting at there. So that's the Buddhist view on that. And the Buddhist really view, this is an important point though, the Buddhist view, because actually, well, okay, maybe I'll switch over to that subject now for a moment. I mentioned it, right, this idea that you have this opportunity, right? Because I wanted to talk a little bit about that contemplation also. And again, that one I mentioned earlier, right, the Buddhist, in the Buddhist contemplation and the stages of the path, they list 8 freedoms and 10 positive endowments, and then they talk about metaphors for, there's all these things. And actually think about it, why did the Buddha, right, and then he gives this metaphor. Do people know the metaphor of the blind turtle? You know that. So the Buddha said, the Buddha gives this analogy. He says, if you the Buddha actually taught this himself. He said, if you took a blind, what are those big turtles called in the ocean? Like a
Sea turtle?
Sea turtle, I guess. So if you took a blind sea turtle, it was blind. He says, right, and it's a metaphor. So he says, this blind sea turtle, you drop it off like in the Pacific Ocean. And once every 100 years, it comes up and takes a breath and goes back under the water. And then you take a golden floating ring, and you throw it in the Arctic, or what's it called, the Arctic Sea, right? And then he says, and the sea turtle comes up once every 100 years, takes a breath, and goes back under. And so the ring is going to float around and sometimes be frozen in icebergs, and sometimes, you know, float down to the South China Sea and then float back up. And he says, how long will it take until the sea turtle that's blind, so it can't do it on purpose, happens to come up through the ring? And then if you think about that when you say, well, maybe never, right? But I guess if you have an infinite amount of time, then eventually, like if you had 1,000 years, it definitely wouldn't happen, right? 10 times, it's 0. I mean, pretty much, well, actually, it'd be 0 chance if it started in the Indian Ocean, or the Pacific and the North, you know, the Arctic Sea. And in 1 million years, it's very unlikely. In 10 million years, it's very unlikely. You know, in 1 billion years, it's not that likely. But if you said, like, trillions and trillions and trillions of years, then you say, well, probably it eventually will happen, but once in how often? Once every few hundred trillion years, something like that. And the Buddha said, he used that as a metaphor, and he said, that's the chances of being you. And he said, your life is so valuable. He said, the Buddha actually said that. He said that, basically he said this, he said, the Buddha said, it was said that the Buddha could kind of see with his mystical vision through the entire universe. And he said, there's no better life form than yours in the universe. Yours, I mean, you, not humans, in other words, human beings, with a brain that works, who have met spiritual teachings, and so on. He said, for cultivating what's important, there's no better life form. Because he said what's important, and the Buddha said, when I look throughout the entire universe, there's nothing more important than altruism. And then he said, and for cultivating altruism, there's no better life form than a human being with a brain that works. He said, so your life form is the best in the entire universe. And so the Buddha, so this is the point I was getting at. So the Buddha taught all these metaphors and examples and lists in order to get people to feel a sense of joy and appreciation at just every moment of being alive. I have a question from what I said earlier. So why did the Buddha have to give 18 and, so altogether there would have been like 18, 19, 20, at least like 23, 24 things to think of, thoughts to think of, just to develop a feeling of appreciation for this moment being alive. Why did the Buddha have to give that many thoughts, like that many things to convince us? Why do you think?
We don't have the habit of thinking.
Yeah, right, we must not have the habit of thinking. The Buddha must have noticed that about us, that we don't have that habit. So he had to give a lot of, like the person who's not angry at somebody, who has to give a lot of reasons to get the person to be angry at that person, right? The Buddha must have noticed that we don't appreciate, we don't know who we are, right? Like that we're that blind that we think, oh well, who cares, I'm just here, and like we don't even think that there's something precious about waking up today. And so the Buddha taught all these reasons, right? And eventually, if you get good at that contemplation, you shouldn't have to think of all 30, 25, whatever things. It should just be natural. Actually, really it should be natural. We should wake up and be unbelievably happy to be alive and be so overjoyed at having this kind of brain and this kind of body and this kind of opportunity and this kind of leisure and to have the freedom, because I'll go into that one a little bit, right? Because even if you, I'm not going to give all the Buddha's teachings, I know we've done it before, but just on a merely conventional level, right? Like most of the, I've said this before, most of the living creatures on this planet are insects. Right? And after insects come what? Fish. Right? Those little tiny fish that whales eat and so on. So that's like the vast majority, right? And then most other are animals, right? All kinds of different animals. Like there are so many fish that that are deep down in the darkness, right? There's all those kind of fish. Then there are the other fish that are up on the surface, and then you can watch on Nature Channel. You see how the dolphins chase them into corners and eat them, or the sharks eat. Like they all get eaten, right? And then the other animals, right? Like squirrels and all those, right? You ever see a hawk catch a squirrel, and the squirrel, it's terrible. And those don't have any freedom, right? And then if you look at human beings, right? The most populous nation is China, right? There's no political freedom at all, right? You can't even. There's no, they burn books, right? Like you can't, and actually they even block out the internet, right? You want to read something and they block it out because it's, and so on, right? There's no freedom at all, right? And you can get arrested. You can be put in a prison and tortured for practicing just Buddhism, right? Which is totally non-violent. But if you practice Buddhism too openly there, you can be put in prison and tortured. And so on, right? And then if you want to study other, imagine if you live in like a Saudi Arabia or something like that, right? Again, if you want to study something that's not, there are certain things you can study there, but if you want to study something that's not accepted, then again, you can be put in prison. So that we happen to be in a circumstance where we have a brain that works, we're human, and then we're in a country where we can study whatever we want to, right? We can openly practice anything we want to practice, and nobody's going to kill us for it. That's unbelievably rare, right? And but do you wake up in the morning and feel that? Like, do you feel overjoyed to be you? Right? And the Buddha is saying, if you don't, then you're one of those people still who are ignorant and blind. You don't see where you're going. You don't see where you are, right? And you don't see what's actually happening. And so he's saying, so think all 18 reasons, think all these things over and over again until it becomes natural. Then stop thinking them, and you'll feel it all the time, right? But does that make sense? And so I want to emphasize this point about contemplative meditation now. That contemplative meditation is just that I hope you wouldn't mind. I think I'll tell a story that Tenzin Bucham, the translator, he's wonderful. Some of you know Tenzin. He translates sometimes at the center. He's a Tibetan scholar who's now about to start his PhD program at the University in Georgia.
Emory?
Emory University. But he said this, I don't think he'd mind me telling this, that one day, Khyentse Rinpoche kept teaching on compassion over and over and over in Bodhicitta. All the time Khyentse Rinpoche would come and he would be teaching on Bodhicitta and how to cultivate compassion. And Tenzin admitted to me, he said one day he went to Khyentse Rinpoche and he said, sorry Rinpoche, it's kind of getting on my nerves a little bit or something. You keep saying it over and over, like why? And he said, Khyentse Rinpoche said to him, there's only one door, so you have to keep knocking until you go through it. He said, there is no other door, so there's no other choice. And Tenzin told me after that his mind changed. But what Khyentse Rinpoche was saying, right, was that sometimes you could think, oh, well, there's some other way, right? But that there is, in other words, compassion is the only. In other words, if you want to practice a valid, meaningful spiritual path, compassion is the only door, right? And repetition, but I want to emphasize this point about repetition, right? In other words, because sometimes we make the mistake of thinking, like, okay, well, I understand, love is wanting others to be happy and compassion is wanting to be free from suffering, and that makes sense, and okay, let's move on, what's next? But that's totally meaningless, actually. That has no meaning at all. It has to have, in other words, it's repetition that creates, it's repetition with emotional presence, right? In other words, just repetition doesn't work either. Whereas if you're if you're repeating like a tape recorder repeats, that's not meaningful either, right? So if you were to just to go, if you were to take prayer beads, right, and say, may all beings be happy, 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 may all beings. Okay, I did 108, may all beings be happy, what's next? That doesn't do it either. That's repetition, but without much meaning, right? So actual, spiritual practice, right, first of all, has to be so you see what I'm getting at here is this, so meditating on the breath is useful because it calms us down, right? And it develops some concentration. But actually, meditating on the breath is not spiritual practice. Meditating on the breath is a way to calm yourself down. It's a good thing, right? It calms you down. At least you're not hurting anybody else while you're doing it. You're not insulting anybody or whatever. And you're calming yourself down, and by you being calmer, other people are calmer, and that's good. But actually, cultivating altruism is a real spiritual practice, right? But how do you do that, right? And I want to emphasize this, Buddhism has so many methods for cultivating compassion and love. But the key to them is this, is to actually engage in a real way with the technique, right? And to do it over and over and over. Right? And then it becomes familiar, and then it becomes your own experience. You see what I mean? But if you just think it so one is if you just say it over and over, right? Oh, may all beings be happy, may all beings, that doesn't do much, right? But also if you just once think, wow, it's true actually, it's true that everybody wants to be happy. And it's true that even the insects want to be happy, and even the worst people in the world are desperate to be happy, and they're going about it in the wrong way, right? And they're hurting themselves and hurting others because they want to be happy and they have no idea what they're doing. And if you cultivate it enough, you'll develop a feeling of compassion for them, right? But if you just do that once, and then you think, okay, well I did that, now let's study emptiness, or I don't know, something that doesn't do much, right? In other words, you have to do it over and over and over until, and this is what Lama Tsongkhapa says, right? Until there will come a point if you do it over and over where just seeing that person, immediately a feeling of compassion will arise. He says, then your mind is trained somewhat. Does that make sense? So that's the way to train your mind, right? And then that's, and the Dalai Lama says over and over, he says, that's, what does he say? That's true spiritual practice, right? In other words, he says that's his spiritual practice, right? Is cultivating altruism in that way. And I want to say this too, so I have a question then, because Buddhism would say, right, I don't know, I'm going off from the kind of main topic, but I think this is more important. So Buddhism would say this, there is no external thing that's going to make you genuinely and lastingly happy, right? There is fame won't do that. Actually, famous people are usually miserable, but wealth won't do that. And again, like, there are lots of rich people who kill themselves, right? Having a really attractive spouse won't do that. Having a good reputation won't do that. Having a good job won't do that, right? Lots of people have good jobs, are miserable, but and I'm not putting those things down, right? But having a good education doesn't make you happy. Right? And so, if Buddhism is saying that the best cause of happiness is compassion, right? That's the Buddhist view. Love is a close second to compassion. Then why is it that almost nobody spends like hours a day cultivating love or compassion? That's my question. Like, why would that be? Actually, and actually, a more important question is why don't I? Right? Like, I just want to ask myself. Well, so why would I spend a lot of time like doing other things? Right? Like going to a movie or trying to get, whatever, try to be popular or trying to get people to think well of me or trying to get some other. Right, so I'm just raising it like an interesting question to contemplate, right? Because what Buddhism's saying is that's the way, if you want others to be happy, that's the best way to do it, right? If you want yourself to be happy, that's the best way to accomplish that. If you want to become a fully enlightened Buddha, then the best way to do that is to cultivate compassion, right? There's no better way to achieve enlightenment. So whether you just want others to be happy, if all you want to do is your family to be happy, you being more loving and compassionate would be the best way to accomplish that. If you want your neighbors to be happy, that's the best way. If you want yourself to be happy, that's the best way. Right? And then if you want to like progress towards enlightenment, that's the best way also. If you want to have good future lives, Tibetan they would say that's also still the best way. So, like it becomes an interesting question. So why don't we do that? And I want to ask you guys. I'll just say, like, I think we already answered that, right? Lama Tsongkhapa said, what? You're like we have this. We are both. Most people are just totally blind, right? What we are actually are somebody who's caught in the riptide with an ankle tied around their thing, but our hands aren't tied, actually, right? Like we could swim, because you have the freedom. Actually, most people, like somebody in China, their hands are tied, right? Whereas they have no choice, actually. I'm not saying all people in China, but I'm saying, whereas if you can be arrested for doing spiritual practice, and if you can't study it because they burned the books, well, then you don't have much freedom, right? But if you have that, then you're like everybody else, except your hands are, somebody like cut the string, whatever, the rope, right? And so what Buddhism is saying is like swim for it now, make the effort now, right? And you can get there. Does that make sense, kind of? I just want to emphasize it. And so, but we have a lot of entropy. We have a lot of like habit of not doing that. And it seems like, oh well, it doesn't feel. People say, oh, it doesn't feel that powerful, or it's hard to do, or, but if you do it over and over again, then it works. And if you do it with a sense of reality, of really being present to the experience. Does that make sense? So I guess I'm like advertising now for altruism meditation. But it is, because because other meditation techniques are, what do I say this? Like meditating on, some of these other ones are good, right? They're good to do, but compared to meditation on compassion, there's no, it's like, there's not really a comparison or something, actually, right? Like in other words, meditation on compassion is the best meditation, actually, that there is. And I could say that, I believe it, but also Shanti Deva said that, the Dalai Lama, so I'm not just making it up. The Dalai Lama in New York one time, he said that, he said if you cultivate compassion, all the other spiritual qualities will come naturally, and if you don't cultivate compassion, then they won't come. Anyway, if you try to cultivate other spiritual qualities without cultivating compassion, then it won't work somehow. Whereas if you focus mainly on compassion, he said, I think the metaphor, he said, then all the others will fall in your hand, like ripe apples kind of, or something, that just fall from the tree or something. They'll come naturally. So the main emphasis should be compassion for meditation. Does that kind of make sense? So, I think that too. Actually, I'll say too. Because actually, if you just look at religion, it's like that, isn't it? Because people could do if people do other, like any religion, Buddhism's the same. All religions, right? If you practice a religion, but you don't emphasize compassion, then you just wind up what? Like you know, well, my religion's good and yours is bad. And not just my religion, but then it becomes like my sect is better, you know, so, and your sect is not as good, and I don't really like that sect, and then it becomes even more specific to my teacher, you know, and like, you know, my teacher's good, and this other teacher, even the same sect, but they're not so good, and I'm better, and, you know, without compassion, then whatever you're doing, right, it becomes like another cause for getting lost, even more. Whereas if you emphasize love and compassion, you know, then whatever you do, it's good, right? Like, in other words, it becomes something helpful to others, right? Not like another reason to close off from others. Otherwise, it just becomes another. Otherwise, even spiritual practice, and you know, that's like terrible, right? If Buddhism becomes another way of saying us and them, then it's like better not to have started. Even. So Buddhism, you know, if you're going to practice Buddhism, you know, it's good to do meditation on anything, you know, but if we leave out, if we don't emphasize love and compassion, then it's just the same as any other activity or something in a way, where it could just become a cause, you know, like a, what's the word, like a baseball team, you know, like, oh no, they won, you know, I wanted my team to win. It becomes like some, you know, nothing, it's not really spiritual, is it? Like, it could have the label of spiritual, but it's not really spiritual. So that's why I think the Dalai Lama is really right when he says, you know, the basis of real spirituality is compassion. And he says what? My true religion is kindness. Because that's what actual Buddhist practice is kindness, right? And so, so if we don't meditate, and I want to, okay, I'll say one last thing, I'm gonna stop. One last thing about this, also. Just because I've made this mistake many times myself, so I want to emphasize it. It's also like, I'll say it this way, because this is the way it finally struck me, was there's a teaching in Buddhism called joyful effort, that says, you know, one of the 6 perfections that bodhisattvas practice is joyful effort. And I don't know, even though I'd heard this years ago, I kept thinking joyful effort meant working hard. Like in some, and I guess because, you know, in our culture, we grow, like, you know, America also was founded by, what, Puritans, right? So the work ethic, Protestant work ethic, which I'm not against, but I'm just saying that's not what joyful effort is. Joyful effort is defined, Maitreya defines it actually, I don't forget the exact words, but basically what he says is, joyful effort means enjoying the process of cultivating positive emotions and getting rid of negative emotions. And so it has nothing to do with going to work, actually, or not going to work. That's not relevant to this. Go to work, you know, do your job, but that's not what joyful effort is. Joyful effort is enjoying the process of getting rid of anger, jealousy, hatred, you know, pettiness, pride, and enjoying cultivating love, compassion, altruism, wisdom, appreciation of being alive, those kind of things, right? That's the definition of joyful effort. So then Buddhist practice, right, is really that, actually. All of Buddhist practice is just, are you decreasing, right, those negative states of mind, right? Are you being less angry, less spiteful, less prideful, less arrogant? And are you cultivating more altruism, more loving kindness, more patience, more acceptance of others, you know, and things like that? And that's actually the definition of not just joyful effort, that's the definition of practicing Dharma, actually, in Buddhism. So in other words, that the real practice would be to enjoy that, right? Like so you could go. You don't have to sit. I mean, it's good to sit like this. I went over the posture, and that's important. But if you just go home and like after work and lay on the couch and think about love, right? I think, okay, you know, now I'm going to relax after work. So my way of relaxing is I'm going to think about love for all beings. Like, may I be happy, everyone be happy, everyone's precious. Like that's very pure Dharma practice, right? Does that make sense? And like, so, you know, one person could be like, I don't know, you know, like going and doing some, like going and volunteering at a monastery or something like that, while feeling, you know, I hope everybody's noticing I'm volunteering here, and you know, and they're not practicing Dharma, right? They could think, oh, I hope the monks are noticing what a hard worker I am, and that I'm really sincere, and you know, so that person's not practicing Dharma, right? Whereas somebody who's like laying on the couch with their feet up, you know, and just thinking, may all beings be happy, everyone's precious, they're practicing Dharma perfectly. You know, so I'm just giving you, like, it's in your mind, right? Does that make sense? So you don't have to, you should set it formally sometimes, you know. But again, if you're sitting up formally like this, you could think, oh, everybody notices what good posture I have. That's not Dharma practice. But Dharma practice would be if you're thinking like that, right? If you're thinking others are precious, you know, may I cherish them from my heart, and may they be happy, and may they not suffer, then that's a perfect Dharma practice. So anyway, see what I'm getting. So let's, it's 12:30, so let's just, we always do that, right, at the beginning, we set our motivation, at the end, so let's just dedicate positive energy, positive karma, any virtue and goodness that we created together. So we can dedicate it, may all beings be happy, may all beings be free from suffering, may there be no wars, no famines, no pettiness, no selfishness, may beings be free from ignorance. May we ourselves, by the virtue of this, be able to cut the ties to beings being, trapped. May we light their way. May we free them from the riptide of karma and delusion. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, that is not arisen, arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, that's the Dalai Lama. Please remain until samsara ends. In particular, may we all, by virtue of this, may we all continuously practice love, compassion, altruism, and bodhicitta, which will bring happiness to ourselves and happiness to others.